Check. Basketball, college. Basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa.
Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball college. I'm your host, Brian Ralph, joined as always by my co-hosts, Connor Hope and Riley Davis. We are in the midst of the college basketball offseason. It is the kind of dull point. The transfer portal has really died down. The biggest news really is the fact that we had Peach Jam at this point this past weekend. We're getting ready for the upcoming season, I guess, but we are kind of in those slow summer months. One big news item did come out that I want to touch on before we get into this mailbag episode. Since we are in this period, I know there's topics that you all want to know about or are interested in, so we figured we tackle some of those in the mailbag episode. But I also think we have to talk about Javon Quinterly, the Alabama transfer committed to Memphis on Thursday night, about an hour or so before we are recording this podcast. Very experienced player, very, very good player when healthy, Riley. Memphis has to replace Kendrick Davis. It seems like Quinterly is going to step into that role. What kind of impact do you see him having for Memphis, and does it change your thinking of Memphis going into next season?
Yeah, I think he's about as good of a Kendrick Davis replacement you can get at this point in the offseason. Like, I think that goes without saying. And I know he's sometimes up and down as a shooter. Maybe doesn't always have the best shot selection, but especially last year when he came in and sort of stabilized that offense at times. And I want to say that I saw him like have some of his best moments, like connecting on live dribble passes that I've seen thus far in his career. So he steps into a Memphis team that I think badly needs that floor general, even more so. Like, I mean, I'm not the biggest Mikey Williams believer in general. I think he kind of peaked as a sophomore in high school, and you want to talk about bad shot selection. That's your guy right there. But they need him even more with the uncertainty around him. And, when we voted for our top 100 players for the Almanac, I don't think I included any Memphis players in there. But it's a team that I think is, to use the cliche, it's greater than the sum of its parts. It's almost like a poor man's version of FAU, where there's not necessarily one star, but they should come together collectively to definitely be like the favorite in the American, bar none. Especially, DeAndre Williams, he's a fringe top 100 player if he gets his waiver. But yeah, I think it has more than enough juice to get back to the tournament and maybe even win a game or two. So.
Well, I think this
first off,
the top of the American
exception to the favorite in the American. Brian was probably going to say the same thing. Isn't FAU in the American?
Oh shoot, I totally botched that.
Yeah, that first round matchup from last year, that the FAU Memphis game, that was absurd. Like that's going to be for the top of the American this year.
Why did I say bar none about Memphis being the favorites? Because that sounds really bad. FAU is the favorite, bar none.
No, we're gonna clip that. Run that on social.
This conference realignment, dude, it just throws me off. I'm like, I know FAU realigned, but for some reason my brain didn't make that connection. I'm just like, Houston's out of the Big 12, so Memphis is the favorite. But Memphis is a great number two.
Realignment. It's the timing too, right? Because you got UCLA and USC moving, like not this year. Neither is Texas and Oklahoma, but Houston is, so.
Yeah. Well, I think it puts them I think they were a clear number 2 in the American beforehand. This certainly solidifies that. I think puts them closer to FAU than it does whoever we think will finish third in the American, which we'll discuss in the coming months as we go through our conference preview series. But this is a team that is looking back to the NCAA tournament. I think having somebody like Quinterly in the backcourt that experienced can surely help them get there. I think, like Kendrick Davis, he brings that experience. He brings something of a steadying hand that Connor, I think Memphis needs and Penny Hardaway teams need at the point. And I'm interested to see him in that Kendrick Davis role, because playing at Alabama, he had a lot of other talented guys around him. He certainly he's going to have that Memphis too, but he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot more.
Yeah, I think what it does is it gives them some level of certainty at the point guard position, right? You don't know what Mikey Williams is going to give you, especially not as a freshman. Caleb Mills is not a point guard. And so, when it's between Mikey Williams and Caleb Mills, like, Caleb Mills might feel like he has the superiority over Mikey Williams in terms of what his role is on the team. And I feel like for Quinterly, it's like Quinterly comes in and goes, okay, Quinterly's the point guard, Mills is the two guard. Put Mikey Williams as a backup, let him develop, right? It just makes it more clear, where I think beforehand, even though they had talent at the guard position, it was really unclear about whose role it was to be that primary point.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So good pickup for Memphis. Certainly helps them. I don't think it makes them a top 25 team or anything like that, but certainly much more competitive, and I think much more stable, as we discussed. Let's dive into the mailbag. First question I think is an interesting one. There are limited options in this question, but I think it branches into a bigger topic that is worth discussing. Question is from our friend Tristan Freeman of Busting Brackets. Make sure you check out bustingbrackets.com. He does an excellent job there. Friend of the show asks, which team of the following 5 is most likely to take a step back next season? The 5 teams he gives are Pitt, Northwestern, Missouri, Arizona State, and Iowa State. Teams that were surprising last year. I think the consensus on all of them is that there is some hesitancy to assume they're going to maintain last season's success. So, Riley, of those 5, who is the most likely to take a step back? Again, those 5 are Pitt, Northwestern, Missouri, Arizona State, Iowa State.
It's going to crush Tristan. And I know, I think Pitt fans tend to like me. I was relatively nice to them as they were beating my terrible team last year. But Pitt, my gosh, I think last year was like a fluke of all flukes. I feel like, they've kind of shown throughout their time in the ACC under Jeff Capel and Kevin Stallings before that they're not really going to finish higher than 13th or 14th. I really don't like this roster unless Jalen Lowe is just awesome off the bat. I think Blake Henson, he's going to have his moments. There are times where he looked really good last year, but his shot selection is a real issue. I think losing that kind of deep cadre of guards, there's no Nike Sabandi, there's no Jamarius Thomas. Thomas was the bailout of all bailouts late in the shot clock, especially in ACC play. You're replacing that with Jalen Lowe and maybe Dior Johnson. Zach Austin was a really fun player in the Big South, but that was kind of the big free agency transfer portal acquisition. And I just don't know if if you really want to bank on a high point player who's basically a 6'5" power forward translating up. So I got to go with Pitt.
Mm-hmm. I have to go with Northwestern. I mean, last season was a huge surprise, and Chase Audige was a big part of that, right? I know you get Boo Buie back, and that's obviously going to help. But Northwestern was, I think, a lot of role players playing the role to perfection, and then you had a number of you had those stars, particularly Audige and Buie, playing like that. Bowie's very good college player. He is not good enough to carry, I think, a roster like Northwestern on his own. I don't think Northwestern is going to go back to being the 14th or 13th team in the Big Ten. They're not going to fall right back to the bottom. But it would not surprise me. It would shock me if they made the tournament again. It would not surprise me if they were in that 11-12 range in the Big Ten, but maybe we're a little bit more competitive. Connor, of those 5, who are you going with?
So I'm going to start off by saying the one team that it's going to kill me. It's going to kill me. The one team here who I think doesn't fall all that much, and just because of the way they play, is Iowa State. That defense,
Cyclones, baby.
That defense is going to be that defense no matter what, and we've pretty much seen the worst that an offense can get from Iowa State. So I think they're going to be, they might take a step back, but they're not going to be that far behind where they were, at least from an efficiency perspective. Obviously, with the Big 12 and the talent that's there, and the talent that's coming in the way of by way of Houston, they might fall back in the rankings. They might have more losses, but I think the team itself is going to be pretty close to where they were the last 2 years. I'm going to say, so I think I agree with Brian that it's probably Northwestern, but I think
we'll take
the opportunity for Arizona State to be really good or really bad is there. It's all new. Last year, you relied a lot on that backcourt crunch time to get the points. Pretty much everyone's gone, and they have talent. They have players that have been all over, but the only constant there that I can think of off the top of my head is Frankie Collins. So it'll be interesting to see what Bobby Hurley does, because this is a roster that I think, with the way the Pac-12 is, could still finish 4th or 5th. But with the way the roster is constructed, I could also see them finishing bottom 4. So it remains to be seen. But I think the one that's guaranteed the most, like their ceiling's the lowest, is probably Northwestern at this point.
With ASU, I think what's interesting is, in recent years, we saw Hurley lean more into defense. I think you think of someone like Warren Washington, and finding ways to sort of try to hang his hat on that. And gosh, who's that? One of the Cambridge brothers was really good defensively. I feel like I'm forgetting one other really good defender they've had in recent years. But, you look at the way this roster is structured now, where with Frankie Collins and Adam Miller, it seems a little bit like he's going back to the erratic guard like roster construction. And I know they call themselves guard you for a little bit. I kind of threw the erratic in there but that's what they were. And I actually think Frankie Collins can hoop a little bit. I think he's really talented, and wouldn't be surprised if he just puts up some like monster numbers, like I'm talking like 15.7 assists or something, just because he's maybe even higher than that because his usage is going to be so high. But yeah, Adam Miller is like the prototypical erratic hot or cold guard that like the Hurley teams of the early 2010s just like had every single year.
Arizona State is going to be fun or going to be terrible.
Yeah. I'm not saying Frankie Collins is bad. I think he'll do decent. I just don't think he's the type of guard that you can really say, you're going to be the culture guy that's going to bring everyone into the Arizona State culture. You're going to be the one who's going to set the tone at every practice because you and Jemiah Neal are the only ones that are coming back.
Right.
Like, that's not, I think, a role Frankie Collins can fit into. I think he's more of you put him in that role where he's the new guy, or he's the guy who needs to acclimate himself and make an impact. He can do that. So it'll be interesting. Remy Martin was the guy I think that could tone set. I don't know if Frankie Collins can.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's expand this a little bit further out than just those 5. Looking at the national landscape, Riley, is there somebody that you're lower on maybe the national consensus?
Or
you think we'll take a step back?
Come back to me. Let's hear from Connor first.
So I was higher than national consensus on this team for a while. I've since very rapidly changed my course, and that's UCLA. I just don't see this team being a top 20, at least not right now. I understand the freshman recruits are good, but they're not great, right? They're not what USC is getting. They're not what Kentucky or Duke are getting from some of their freshman recruits. And you add that to a team that no longer has its 2 lifebloods. One of the best point guards in the country, one of the best glue guys. I mean, you call him a glue guy because that's kind of what he was. He was a glue guy that just scored a ton in Jaime Jaquez. Like, those 2 guys are gone. Mm-hmm. You get Adem Bona back, but like, what is this team going to be? I don't know. So I was higher on them. I thought I had them in like the top 20 when most people weren't. But I don't know if I would touch them with a 10-foot pole, which means that they're going to do what Purdue did to me last year when I said the same thing about Purdue not being a top 25 team, and miraculously come up with, all conference level guards. So
I'm excited to see what Dylan Andrews does in a potential breakout season for UCLA. Come in, fill in the Tiger Campbell role, was backup last year as a freshman, showed flashes, I thought, particularly late in the year. If he steps up and fills that the way I think he can, I think UCLA is a borderline top 25, top 20 team. But there are some questions there, so we'll see how that goes. Riley, who you got?
I want to go with Arkansas, and I feel like this is the type of question it burns me. I was like, I went through a little phase where I was low on Arkansas last year, and they made the second weekend, like even as an 8 seed. because I just think Muss is so good of a coach that like he's gonna figure it out. But just looking at this roster, I know they're gonna be a consensus top 25, maybe even top 15 type team. But when you have guys like Devontae Davis and Caleb Battle and L. Ellis who are kind of used to having the ball a lot and taking whatever shot they want, like how is that all going to mesh together? I mean, I think Tremont Mark is someone who could be like which could shine in a little more of an expanded role. I think he's still a really good defender coming from that Houston system. But yeah, you just look at it and it's like, where is the shooting going to come from? Like Keon Minifield, I want to say he was a 30% shooter as well. And it could be some of the same issues that sort of hurt Arkansas during the regular season, but I don't really see the same athleticism of a guy like a Ricky Council IV. And I know having Trevon Brazile coming back, that definitely gives them a boost, but like, you know, Ricky Council wasn't someone who was going to knock down more than 30% of his threes, but you give him an open lane and he's going to yam on somebody and find other ways to sort of compensate for that. And I just don't know if the transfers they're bringing in, if anyone kind of has that same potential.
I like the Arkansas pick. To me, they have the same mold of last year's team without the top end talent of last year's team, right? Like last year's team, as you mentioned, was very flawed in terms of the lack of outside shooting and just perimeter threats. Great slashers, but there wasn't anybody who really stretched the floor, and as a result, their spacing was horrible. This team faces the same problems and isn't going to have a Nick Smith, Anthony Black, Jordan Walsh to help fix that, like kind of help override that. So I think that's a good pick.
I would like to just throw out there that with what they're bringing in, I think it's just an elevated version of what Musselman got from his teams the 2 previous years, which was gritty, prove it transfers, right? Granted, there are some transfers they're bringing, like Chandler Lawson's not a prove it transfer, right? Like he's gained respect. Tremont Mark is not a prove it transfer, but Menifield, Battle, Davenport, L. Ellis, like those are guys who were on teams that weren't good, and especially for like L. Ellis, I think unfortunately a lot of the focus and a lot of the you need to carry this team was placed on him because he was the only guard. You put him in a system where he doesn't have to be that. He can just play his game and prove that he belongs in that conversation as like a really good guard in a really good conference with the opportunity to lead his team deep in the tournament. Sink or swim. But I like the roster makeup for a deep run from this team, I think, more than last year's team, based purely on the fact that these are all guys who have been there, done that. They're going to Arkansas because they've seen what transfers can do there. They want to play for a coach that's just as gritty as I think they want to be. And it's a prove it situation rather than one and done freshmen that, and I know injuries play a big factor in last year for Arkansas, but I do think that if you had a couple more players that were, this type of mold, they might have been a little bit better after that Kansas win.
This is going to be...
They weren't beating UConn, but no one was.
This is going to be a little bit blasphemous, I think, especially considering the history of this podcast. But I also I think Gonzaga is a little bit overrated right now. It's blasphemous. It feels blasphemous to say that, and I hesitate because of Mark Few's track record and the fact that I really like Ryan Nembhard because I'm a sucker for Nembhards. But I don't see the fit with this team, and there's a lot of assuming we are doing much more so than we have at least in recent history with Gonzaga, right? I'm going to be okay assuming Ryan Nembhard steps in and excels in the system because we've seen what he's done at Creighton and it seems to translate pretty well. We're assuming that Graham Ike is going to be the same player he was 2 seasons ago at Wyoming. We're going to assume there's no lingering effects of that injury. We're going to assume Steele Venters, with the step up in competition, is still relatively the same kind of productive guy. We're going to assume that Anton Watson steps out of that role and takes a step up, which we assumed that Julian Strother was last year, and he kind of did, kind of didn't. Did at the right time, certainly, with that shot against UCLA. We're going to assume the same thing with Nolan Hickman as well, right? And there's a lot of assuming there for guys who, again, outside of Nembhard, guys who haven't necessarily shown it yet. I'm going to look like a fool because of Mark Few's track record of player development. I know I'm going to look like a fool right now as we sit recording this on July 13th. I don't know if I see Gonzaga being this top 10, top 15 team that people see. Now, one of the questions we got in from Joshua Schwader, I apologize if I pronounced the name wrong, was asking how far Gonzaga was going to go in the tournament this year. I think this could be the year the Sweet 16 streak ends, honestly. That's going to depend on draw and the seed they get, but I think there's a better chance of it happening this year than really any point in the last 8.
They need a bench guard is what they need. And I think it also depends on who their starting 3 is.
If it's Dusty or Steele.
And that's there's a lot there. Like there's too many questions for me.
The one that I'm getting from people who are at the practice that people are like underestimating is Jun Siakio. You saw that viral video of him and Dusty shooting the 3. He is the Rui Hachimura, Corey Kispert 3-4 comp. Like he's that guy who can step into that role off the bench or be a starting 3. He also might have the highest ceiling of anyone on that team. And so you put him into that role. If he excels, this is a team I think can make a Sweet 16, maybe challenge for an Elite 8. I don't think they're talented enough to get past that. But they need a bench guard because you're going to need to rotate Nembhard and Hickman out. Mark Few likes to run 2 ball handlers 90% of the time, and they don't have another ball handler.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's stick on the negative train, but switch to some transfers. Carl Heiser has a question. The transfer edition you think is getting a little bit too much hype? Someone who is transferring that's maybe a little bit overrated. There are a couple of guys who come to mind for me, but Riley, I'm curious to hear your thoughts of somebody who you think might be getting a little bit too much buzz. Is it someone on Arkansas?
I already need to think of another one because I said my piece about Arkansas. Maybe like Jaden Bradley at Arizona.
Or Caleb Love.
I feel like Arizona's or Caleb Love. Yeah, you could pick your choice of the Arizona backcourt. I mean, I'm high on. I don't know. I was pretty high on Jaden Bradley coming out of high school, and I thought he showed flashes at Alabama. As I think I'm very prone to just falling in love with guys who can throw like full court passes in transition, and that was like all of Jaden Bradley's best film at IMG. But there's some serious concerns with the shot creation there. I also I have no intel on what Jaden Bradley's like as a player or his mentality, but I do wonder what is the split between him and Caleb Love going to be like with who's on the ball? Because I think you really want Caleb Love as that secondary ball handler, the secondary creator who can get the ball off a ball reversal and attack a closeout, or he'll make some really nice drive and kick passes. But I just wonder is there going to be some of that same tension that, sort of existed this past year between RJ Davis and Caleb Love with who's supposed to be engineering the offense, who gets first dibs on ball?
Well, you got Boswell there too, who's going to be stepping into a bigger role too.
But Boswell was not good in that FIBA event, and USA finished fourth. I know, but that FIBA event has been a launching pad for stardom for guys like Chet, for guys like Kenneth Lofton, for guys like Jaden Ivey, and the fact that Boswell that they were all bad, and I don't know, that made me really want to sell any stock on both Mark Armstrong and Kylan Boswell. So I don't know. I'm kind of factoring in both Bradley and Caleb Love being bigger factors than him this year.
Connor, anybody you're particularly negative on as we wear our hater hat?
I don't understand the fit of Dalton Connect at Tennessee. Good scorer, but everyone in the Big Sky is a good scorer unless they're playing like a Montana State. I don't know if he's getting a lot of buzz. He's getting more buzz than he deserves. Not Connect, but DJ Rodman is getting more buzz than I think he deserves purely because he's
Rodman.
It's Rodman and James, right? And like people are pointing to that, and almost like Collier and Boogie Ellis, who are the actual two best players on that USC team, are almost taking a back seat to Rodman and James and that whole storyline. And it doesn't make sense at all to me, because if you go in saying, you know, our two best players are Rodman and James, like, okay, if you're going in saying like our premier players are Boogie Ellis and Isaiah Collier, it's like, oh, that's a team that can make a deep run. And then the third one is just Kellel Ware. I think he was ranked 2 by 247. I don't get it. Like, we saw nothing from him at Oregon that would indicate that he's the second best transfer in the portal.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned him so that I don't have to. I hated on Indiana enough last year that I don't want Indiana fans to get more mad at me. And I'm sorry to do this, Riley, but Harrison Ingram's the guy for me, where it's
That's
like
fair.
He is a former 5-star prospect who hit the portal. And I think that, and he's going to a blue blood. I think that's why the hype is, because watching him play, particularly last season, was rough. He's a guy who will get 5 rebounds, 5 assists in a game, but he'll also, in that same game, score 4 points on like 2 of 9 shooting. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's not there for me. I think he's a role player, and UNC is going to ask him to play a role, but ask him to play an important role. I think they're going to try and ask him to be number 3 next to RJ Davis and Mondo Baycott. And I don't think you're going to get from him at least what the hype is going to be, and has been for him.
So if I can give a little pushback, because y'all know all offseason I've been like, yeah, don't rank UNC. This team has to prove it to me. But like Harrison Ingram is one of the lower, well, I mean, some of his athletic limitations I think is concerning, because ideally, like, I think Baycott's a really underrated defender, but he's not like a true rim protector. And ideally you get a little more athleticism at the 4 next to him. But I think Harrison Ingram can be a really good 3rd or 4th option if Elliot Cadeau lives up to the hype. He's the one who is getting the most hype, like way more than Ingram. But yeah, one of my friends who's a scout has been sort of breaking down some of there was some pickup video footage of like a legit pickup game that got leaked, that he was looking at Harrison Ingram's shot and breaking that down, and said that his hand placement's a lot better than it was at Stanford. That's something that UNC coaches have been working on. I think his, like, I don't know if y'all have ever noticed this watching him, his base is kind of odd. Like his feet almost stick out like duck feet when he's shooting. Like that's a little bit concerning, but I kind of see him being like a very capable 3rd or 4th option. And like, even looking at his, synergy numbers of shooting 40% on catch and shoot threes last year, I mean, that's going to be his role at UNC. He's not really going to be asked to create like threes off the bounce or anything. So I think he can shine in that role. I just have other questions about UNC. One other transfer I just thought of that like I really want to throw in here is Ray J. Dennis at Baylor. Just because I know any guard should get a boost under Scott Drew. I get that. He sort of figured that out the last 5 years. But I just think back to a couple of years ago at Boise State, where he was a solid but unspectacular point guard for like a 9 seed.
Yeah. I'm always
going to hop into the defense, Brian, of Harrison Ingram for a second.
Let's go back to Harry Ingram.
Fine.
Talent-wise,
you guys can both be wrong.
Form-wise, like, you have valid concerns. I think the one thing that you can't doubt, though, is his IQ. And if there's one thing that always translates, that you can always plug a guy in and trust that even if he's not the best shooter, even if he's not the quickest, most athletic guy, it's if he's in the right position most of the time, if he knows what the right play is most of the time, like, that's a guy you want on your team. So is he top 20? Probably not. But I think getting someone that's high IQ in Ingram after losing someone who made a lot of low IQ plays in Caleb Love is, while Caleb Love might be the better talent, I think you get a step up in trusting that Ingram's going to do the right thing.
I mean, that's not a high bar to clear. If you just want to make smarter decisions than Caleb Love, you know. We'll go to one more question. We'll stick in the triangle and transfer portal, and I'll touch on it real quick before I move on. But ACC State fan asks if we think the transfers that were brought in by NC State link up for the loss in production with Traquavion Smith and Jarkel Joyner leaving. Yes, but I don't think they're necessarily better, if that makes sense for NC State. I think MJ Rice will be good. I think DJ Horn will continue to do what DJ Horn has done. The guys they brought in come from notable programs, so NC State fans are excited, and I think this team will be very similar to last year's team, where they'll be exciting and fun. But nothing really got better that they struggled with last year. Like, they're kind of the same old team, except you're hoping on MJ Rice being that 5-star guy he was that didn't really get a chance at Kansas. You're hoping Ben Middlebrooks takes a step forward. Like, you've seen what he is in the ACC. He kind of is what he is. I think State will be a bubble team. I think that's just where the Wolfpack are, and at least at this point in the Kevin Keatts tenure, that's where they're living. So I don't have any other expectations for them. Ending up in the same place to me means they replace the production adequately enough. It'll be probably more by group as opposed to so centralized on two guys. But we'll see. I have them as a bubble team.
I don't even think they'll be on the bubble. I don't like these additions. I think Lucas Harkins, our resident Butler fan, didn't seem sad at all to lose Jaden Taylor. Like, he was banging the drum that dude can't shoot, which I think is alarming when you look at needing to step in to replace the production of Baby T and Jarkel Joyner. I will say I'm not a big DJ Horn guy. I think he fits that erratic guard U archetype,
which
Arizona
is Keats'
State
style too.
That's true. If there is any hope, it's that I didn't think Jarkel Joyner was very good. I thought he was just sort of like a good stats, bad team guy at Ole Miss, and Keats turned that dude into a stud. Like, Joyner was phenomenal last year. He was excellent ACC play. Really controlled the game, controlled the pace, and was just an absolute bucket who could get to his mid-range spot, make threes. So maybe there's the hope for DJ Horn to have that transformation as well. I really think the key to them winning games is just play through DJ Burns, run two-man game with him and Casey Morsell, let him draw doubles and kick out to Morsell for three. That is going to be the key to success a lot more, I think, than these guard additions they brought in.
Yeah.
It's funny because I think most of their additions are a little bit overrated, except for the one no one talks about. Again, another Stanford transfer. I actually like bringing in a guy like Michael O'Connell to this erratic guard structure, because good defensive guard, knows how to pass the ball, knows how to make plays for others, smart, high IQ guy, just not a high talent guy. And I think putting him in a bench role where he can come off the bench and kind of calm everything down is exactly what you need at NC State, given what the rest of the roster looks like.
Keats has become one of these guys that is kind of constantly on the hot seat. We have a question about the hot seat from Alex Cervantes. Him and Carl, shout out to Jim Range Pod. Make sure you check that out as well. He has a question about which coach that's on the hot seat is most likely to pull a Chris Collins and engineer a postseason berth, potentially getting an extension and saving his job. I don't think that's Keats this year. There are a number of coaches in the country who are on the hot seat, several of whom reside in the ACC. Riley, has anybody in particular stick out to you as having a surprise campaign to prolong their tenure?
Yes, and I'm going to stay in the ACC. It's the man who is inevitable, Brad Brownell, who can never die. I don't know if either of y'all are Rob Zombie fans or know his smash hit Dragula, slam in the back of my Dragula, but he has a lyric in that song that says, I will never die. And that is the Brad Brownell tenure at Clemson. And I think this Clemson team is going to be awesome. I've been high on them since PJ Hall announced he was coming back. When you have Chase Hunter, who's one of the most underrated guards in the ACC, really good defender too. PJ Hall will be a first team all conference guy. Joe Girard coming into an infrastructure that can – I do love PJ, man. But Joe Girard coming into an infrastructure that can mask his defensive deficiencies. Jack Clark, a good enough shooter. And I think Ian Shefflin is a prime sort of breakout / most improved guy, which ties into another question. I think this Clemson team is going to be awesome and will rival that team from, I think, 2018 that made the Sweet 16 as like Brownell's best unit at Clemson thus far.
I don't know. I mean, these coaches are on the hot seat because their teams stink, right? I think if anybody's going to do it, honestly, and I'm not doing this just for our man Eli, might be Mike Hopkins at Washington. And that it's more of a standpoint of the Pac-12 is not going to be as good as it has been in years past, right? UCLA has questions. USC is going to be good. Arizona is going to be good. Outside of that, though, it is a conference with a bunch of question marks. There's enough talent there for them to figure it out. And once upon a time, he had the Huskies winning back-to-back Pac-12 titles, right? That's not too long ago. I see a scenario where that happens. I don't know if Washington fans want that, but that's a scenario to me. I think that's in play, and it might be the most realistic as I'm looking at. Brad Brownell, whether they make the tournament or not, is just gonna be on 1 year deals and 1 year deals.
He's inevitable. I think it's a guy in the Pac-12. I between Mike Hopkins and Jared Haas.
Stanford's because the good.
They're like 30th on Bart Torvik right now, man. Don't sleep on them.
They are. Their offense on Bart Torvik is like 11th. But they bring in Stojakovic. Like if it's not this year, it's never. They bring in Stojakovic. They bring in Jared Bynum. They have a bunch of dudes, I think, that can do things. It's interesting. Torvik's going to go down because Torvik still has Michael O'Connell on Stanford. But I do think this Stanford team has the capability to be a top half Pac-12 type of team. Part of that is because I don't think the Pac-12 is good outside of USC and Arizona. But part of that is because I think that they're a roster that's probably average compared to the rest of the high majors in the country, and average is good when it comes to the Pac-12.
Let's stay in the Pac-12 because we got a question from Matthew Stewart asking who we think will win the Pac-12. I will jump in. We talked about USC and Arizona being the only real good teams. I think it's going to be USC. I am 100% buying into the Trojans this year, and not because of Bronny James and Mr. Rodman. I'm a little bit more detailed than that, I hope. Although I do think Bronny James is going to play a big role for that. I talked about this a couple weeks ago, if I remember correctly, on the podcast. The 3-guard combination of Bronny James, Isaiah Collier, and Boogie Ellis, I think has the potential to be one of the better backcourts in the country. I think the pieces there fit really well too. And they fit more of the up and down style Andy Enfield played at Florida Gulf Coast and played early on in his tenure. I know we think of his time at USC as having these really big athletic bigs, big bigs. There you go, Brian. But these really athletic, jumpy, athletic bigs and playing through them because he's had the Mobleys, right? He's had Okongwu. He's had those guys. I think this year we see him get back to kind of more of the style that we saw him play when he got the job and was having success. This team fits that mold. So to me, it's going to be a pretty tight race between them and Arizona. I certainly think Arizona's going to be really good too. This is just a reflection of how much I think USC, how good they're going to be. I think they're going to be in the mix for potentially top 3 seed in the NCAA tournament.
I still think it's Arizona. USC is the closest because I think USC is the closest defensively to being able to stop Arizona. But I think the way Arizona plays, it's erratic. They're not getting less efficient with Caleb Love because Caleb Love's not that much less efficient than Kirk Kriisa. And I think that Arizona, the style they play, it's worked for Gonzaga, it's worked for a bunch of teams. It's really, really, really tough to play against. If USC comes around and gets that defense that Andy Enfield wants them to play and can shut down that Arizona backcourt, then yes, I can see USC being the only other team to win it. But you have to beat Arizona twice. You probably have to beat UCLA at least once, if not twice. Like, there's a lot of things that have to happen for USC to beat Arizona.
Riley, be the tiebreaker.
I wanted. I'll go USC. I wanted to kind of be the one to be original and pick them, but then Ralph beat me to it. But I think he's right. I don't know, man. Like it's a guards game. Call your Boogie Ellis. Like I'll take that 1-2 punch over Jaden Bradley and Caleb Love and Kylan Boswell. And I'll take Bronny as the third guard tiebreaker too. And I need to get eyes on Arrington Page. I know he's a pretty highly touted recruit. I want to become a little more familiar with his game, but if Iwuchukwu is recovered from that heart issue, they got that big man with pedigree. I think Kajani Wright has a little bit of pedigree as well that fits into that infield mold of athletic bigs too. So it's like you kind of get the best of both worlds there. So yeah, I'll take the Trojans.
Got another question for Matthew Stewart, so we'll stick with that as we shift back over to the ACC. He wants to know who will need to step up for Virginia this year to help out Reese Beekman. I'll go ahead and go first again because my answer is everybody. Right now, to me, it looks like a team of Reese Beekman and dudes. And those dudes need to step up because
those dudes need to be dudes.
Those dudes need to be dudes because that's my answer.
I'll name one specifically and say Andrew Rohde, the St. Thomas transfer. Shout out to the Tommies. I don't know, man. His highlights are freaking awesome. I know it's like you're moving up from the Summit to the ACC and going from like if you could pick one league that epitomized the antithesis of like Tony Bennett, would you pick the Summit League? Because it's got to be up there. No defense, getting up and down. But I think like looking at his numbers, what he did as a freshman, even in the Summit, like he's got a ton of potential as a secondary creator, and I think that's really what you need next to Reese Beekman. You can't have him be the only ball handler, like the only guy who can create. So if Andrew Rohde can pan out, like I don't know, 60% as good as Baylor Shireman, that would be a huge success for Virginia and would be enough to get them back in the tournament this year, considering I think like they kind of have some studs in the front court. I'll get to that with another question. But yes, I'll go Andrew Rohde.
On the topic of Reese Beekman, we got another question. There was a recent who would you rather have this season, Reese Beekman or DJ Wagner, poll posted and was overwhelmingly in favor of Wagner. Yeah. I completely agree. It should be DJ Wagner. Reese Beekman is fine. Reese Beekman is fine. If Reese Beekman was not at Virginia and was at Virginia Tech, I don't think we'd think of Reese Beekman the same way. I think a lot of the talk about Reese Beekman is about who we want Reese Beekman to be. And I will admit, the first month of last season, when Virginia was a really elite team and up in top 5 in the country, he played like that guy. He scored double figures. He was the go-to offensive guy. He showed improved chops as a playmaker. He could do. He put it all together, right? But after that first month, when Virginia started crawling back a little bit, you saw a lot of 7-point games, 8-point games, 6-point games. There were 12, 15 in there too, but that's not a star. That's a good player, and I think Reese Beekman is fine. That's a star. not a star. DJ Wagner, we again have yet to see him actually play in a college game, but to me, he has that star potential. He creates, gets his own shot consistently. So I'll take him. My answer might change after a month, depending on again how Kentucky uses Wagner. But he's got a lot more in the bag than Beekman does, and Beekman has proven again to be fine. But I'm going to go with Wagner in that upside.
Yeah, I think in a vacuum, it would be Wagner. It wouldn't be particularly close. I've watched a little bit of these Kentucky Global Jam games, and Wagner looks legit. Like he can blows by his man seemingly at will, really, really quick. Like I did not realize how fast he was with the ball in his hands. He gets to his spots pretty well too. Like he's been able to create separation to get shots off, and they haven't always gone down. But I think that's something that you're going to see those shots start to fall a little bit more as he adjusts to competition. However, I might say that Reese Beekman could be better for this Kentucky team than DJ Wagner because he fills more gaps. It kind of depends on what you think of Rob Dillingham, who conversely has not looked really good in Global Jam. I've seen some Kentucky fans on Twitter gassing up his 4-point performance today, which I say, love yourself more, Big Blue Nation. You deserve better than gassing up 4-point Rob Dillingham games. But if you were to pair Beekman alongside Dillingham, you'd have a guard with good size who's a defensive beast that can mask some of his deficiencies and is going to defer a little bit. Like I think Reese Beekman has posted over 5 assists per game at Virginia, like definitely last year, maybe even the year before, which factoring in their pace and everything is really impressive. Whereas I think Wagner wants to be on ball more and like create for himself, and rather, I don't think he's necessarily going to be the most advanced passer we see this upcoming year.
Connor wants to take Beekman.
I want to take Beekman so bad. Like the allure of Wagner is there, and depending on the team, like if you're a team like Arizona or Gonzaga or any of these teams that like to play with pace, like to get out on offense, sure, you're taking Wagner every time. But if you know you're going to get a player that led the ACC in steal percentage 2 years in a row, was top 3 in assist percentage 2 years in a row, defensive player of the year, 2-time all-conference defense, 2-time one time he was all-conference last year, all ACC tournament last year, 10 points, 5 assists, 35% from 3, 80% from the free throw line. And you're giving that up for the allure of a freshman. Like that's the tough pill to swallow. Like, yes, Reese Beekman is fine, but he's also just like solidly fine. Like you know what you're going to get out from him and it's good. If I'm Gonzaga, I'm taking DJ Wagner. You need that. You just need that talent. But if I'm Virginia or St. Mary's or one of these teams that like plays in the half court, and they just need the guy to facilitate, play defense, has the experience, like I'm taking Beekman. I think Beekman is valuable in more situations, even if his ceiling's not as high as DJ Wagner in the situations in which you'd rather have DJ Wagner.
Do you know when Beekman was at his best? Or would be at his best, I think, hypothetically. Playing next to a guy like DJ Wagner. Having Wagner be the lead guy and Beekman be the secondary option. So that to me puts the icing on the cake. Let's not leave the ACC just yet. We have a couple more ACC questions. This one's from Matt Schneider. Riley, I'm going to go with you because I think this has a Virginia lean for you too. Who is some of your top candidates for the most improved player in the ACC next season?
Ryan Dunn was the first that stuck out to me. I don't know if that's where you're going, Ralph.
I'm not going with Virginia, but I know you hinted at it.
I think Ryan Dunn has all the makings of like that next great interior defender that Tony Bennett has just thrived with. When you think of guys like Isaiah Wilkins, Anthony Gill, Mamadi Diakite, like Dunn has that exact same DNA, the exact same like 6'8", 6'9" build, but his wingspan is, I think, over 7 feet. And even the flashes he showed last year coming over as like a weak side rim protector, I think that dude can like get Virginia back to being the elite defense that we see year in, year out in the ACC. I I know I hinted at Ian Shefflin earlier. I'm not going to completely go with him, but I think he deserves like a little courtesy nod, a little honorable mention, but I'll let y'all go and pick maybe some of the bigger names.
Mine ties in with the question from Macon for who's winning ACC Player of the Year. It's going to be Tyrese Proctor. And it's not sexy to take somebody like that winning Most Improved Player, but going from a sub 10 point per game scorer to somebody who I think is going to be a first team All-American and is my like non-Zach Edey National Player of the Year pick. Making that jump is going to make you Most Improved Player. So to me, he's got to be that guy. We saw him grow as the season went on last year. He was really shaky in November and December. Some really bad turnovers. It was uncomfortable playing full-time point guard. It felt like it for Duke. Shot was off. Keep in mind, he had reclassified and graduated high school year early, so he should have been a senior in high school and looked like it. And we've talked a lot on this podcast about guards who have reclassified and looked awful and been awful. Dylan Askew, somebody who comes to mind when we talked about that. But he got better as the season went on. And at the end of the year, he was Duke's best player. He was making passes in the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament that were absurd. He was creating shots off the bounce that were NBA level shots. Like, there was a real chance and I think a real fear that he was going to go pro and be a first round pick and they wouldn't get him back, which would have been fine.
Gone pro.
Well, they got him back. He's got a potential lottery pick this year. I think he's just on that trajectory. And to me, like that's the ACC Player of the Year, potential National Player of the Year. Still going to be Zach Edey, but potential National Player of the Year there. We talk about Most Improved Player a lot as guys making the jump from non-impactful to impactful players. But he's going to be somebody who makes such a jump from being impactful to mega impactful that I think he wins that award. Connor, do you have a Most Improved or ACC Player of the Year pick?
Not ACC player. Well, I think ACC Player of the Year is going to be flip a coin between Filipowski and Tyrese Proctor, and who people like more from Duke, and that's the winner.
You missed a golden opportunity to make a pun on flip a coin and flip, man. Come on now.
I think it's going to get lost in the weeds because I don't think the team's going to be very good. But I want to see a full season from Baba Miller where he's not coming in halfway through because of eligibility issues or whatever. And we've seen this from a lot of foreign guys where that first year they're adjusting to the American style of the game, especially at Florida State and in the ACC where you're really just adjusting to the way they play. And towards the end of that season, you saw moments. I think it was the Clemson game where you saw some flashes from Baba Miller. And then the Clemson game, which was where he shot like 3 of 4 from deep, scored 12 points, 6 rebounds. Like that's the Baba Miller I want to see. And Florida State, I don't think is going to be very good. But Baba Miller, I think, is going to be one of those guys who's going to be really improved. And you're going to start seeing him again kind of creep back up into that. Give him a year, give him 2 years. He could be one of those experienced guys that goes in the late first, early second round because he's got that raw talent. I think it's just a matter of harnessing it and fine-tuning it within Florida State system.
I don't hate that.
Yeah,
I don't hate that at all.
Yeah, I like the Baba pick a lot. I think Florida State might be a year away from getting back to the tournament. Maybe they'll make the NIT this year. That'll honestly be a success. I think Florida State's a good program. I love Leonard Hamilton. It's not a slight, but just like they lost a lot. Anyway, I got one more guy I want to mention that'll actually tie into a question from Jim Root.
Bring him
I
on.
mean to hijack you, Brian, but yeah, I got a little 2 for 1. I want to give a shout out to Amari Abram at Georgia Tech, who I guess is a first-year ACC player coming in from Ole Miss, but he'll have the ball in his hands a lot at Georgia Tech, and I think the upgrade from Kermit Davis to Damon Stoudemire will be legit. I also think that ties into one of Jim's question was first-year head coach to make the ACC, and I'm going to go first-year head coach to make the Sweet 16. Yes. First year coach to make the Sweet 16. And I'm going to go bold and say Damon Stoudemire gets it done at Georgia Tech. I think Miles Kelly is the best player that no one knows about. What Stoudemire
who are his assistants?
I don't know. I just know he did it Pacific.
I love Damon Stoudemire, and I think he's going to do a great job. But what?
I'm getting out of pocket here, man. Let me get bold.
I'm gonna explain why I asked that question. When he was at Pacific and I went through a ton of games, he was very much a player coach, right? He would coach the players, tell them what they did wrong. He had two coordinators coordinating the offense and defense, and they were the ones coaching everything on the floor. And I think we've seen this with the seasons in which Juwan Howard has been successful, the seasons in which Penny Hardaway started figuring things out. Like, having good assistants for those coaches who come in and they're player coaches, they're NBA guys who want to coach up their players is very important. I haven't looked at Georgia Tech staff, so they could very well have very, very, very strong assistants. But I think that's going to make or break at least the first couple of years for Stoudemire. But he's one of those guys. His teams are always gritty. So I like the pick for them to make the ACC race interesting, because I think they can throw a wrench in some of these top 3, top 4 teams bids for a regular season. I don't know. The ACC doesn't recognize regular season champions. The regular season 1 seed for the ACC, because I just think if his players play anything like his players played at Pacific, I mean, talent only wins so much when the other team's willing to fight. So
thank you, Connor. He will at the very least make the Sweet 16 of the NIT. But I think the Georgia Tech roster is good, man. They got like, I know Kawasi Reeves didn't do anything at Florida, but they got a couple former like top 75 recruits who are entering their third year, and that third year, like this rising junior class, like, I don't know. I think you're going to see more junior year breakouts from that class because of COVID and the way that stunted developments, and even the way it sort of skewed some recruiting rankings. That's kind of my theory, though. And there's a very obvious first-year head coach who I think will legitimately make the Sweet 16 or have a great chance to, that I didn't want to pick. I'll leave one of y'all to pick him. So I had to go bold and take Damon Stoudemire.
I'll do it. I'll take Chris Beard.
Oh, that's actually not even who I was thinking of. There's one more who seems pretty obvious, but
well, yeah. I mean, Chris Beard has that pedigree, particularly in the tournament. I think he's done a great job of elevating the talent level of Ole Miss roster already. To me, that's an easy pick.
Connor, you also
leads in. Yeah, Connor, who you got?
I can't even think of first year head coaches right now. Chris, I mean, can I cheat and say Rodney Terry?
yeah. Riley, were you thinking Rick Pitino?
Oh, I guess, dang, there's a lot of good choices. I was going to say McCaslin at Texas Tech, just because I think
I don't like Texas Tech. He's talent enough. I like him as a coach.
That's fair. I guess, he won a tournament game at North Texas to where I'm like, upgraded talent enough to where I could see that happen for him in year one.
Watch, we're all wrong, and somehow, some way, Mad Dog Madsen takes Cal to the Sweet 16.
It's going to be Will Wade at McNeese. College basketball won't know what to do with itself. That gets into Jim's other question. I brought up Bruce Pearl. He wants us to rank these 3 coaches, which, by the way, shout out Jim Root, shout out 3 Man Weave. Make sure you check them out as well. Bruce Pearl, Eric Musselman, Nate Oates. Rank those 3. Connor, I'll start with you.
Jeez. This is going to be controversial. From best to worst, or from
best to worst?
Best to worst. Bruce Pearl, Nate Oates, Eric Musselman.
Oh, do you care to explain?
I think it's time. Like, Bruce Pearl's he's done the most, right? Like, he's maybe not as consistently up there as the other 2, but when he puts teams together, they get old and then they win. And in a sport where we're consistently trying to, every year you have to be really good, I think Bruce Pearl's done a really good job of kind of like tempering expectations. I mean, like, no, like, I'd rather be a Final Four contender every 2 to 3 years than a team that's going to get knocked out in the Sweet 16 every single year, right? So there's that. I agree with you. If it was 2 years ago, I might have put Musselman second. But I think Musselman has lost his way in terms of intentionality when it comes to his roster making, which is why I put him third. Like, I agree. Like I said earlier, I like this roster, but it's missing that sort of oomph that I think the first three rosters he had had. I like the way Nate Oates coach. I don't like the way he handles himself all the time. I think sometimes he can be a bit of an ass, but I do think that his teams play clean. And they were good last year, right? And they just lost to a San Diego State team that was perfectly made to beat them. And I think if they had beat San Diego State, I don't think anyone was beating UConn, but I think that would have been a battle in the national championship if Alabama had gone up against UConn. I just don't think, Eric Musselman, he's made 2 Elite Eights and a Sweet 16 in the last 3 years, but he's never gotten over the hump to the point where I feel like I have to put him in the top 2.
Riley?
I'd also go Pearl number 1. I'm putting Muss number 2, Oates 3. With Pearl, a lot of what Connor already said. Like, Pearl at his best is really tough to beat. He has the lone Final Four of the 3. Something that I think is really underrated about him is his ability to find talent in that like 30 to 40 range of like high school recruits. When you look at like guys like Chuma Okeke, Isaac Okoro, Aiden Holloway this year, I think will be the next in that line. Like Sharif Cooper was sort of in that range. I think he's like the way that he identifies talent, and even, I mean, Janai Broom put up huge numbers at Morehead State, but he found a guy who fit his system who was able to put up numbers at Auburn as well. So I think his talent eval is something that I would say sets him apart. And I just think that, like Auburn's best teams are absolutely terrifying to go against, the way they can pressure, the way they can speed teams up, and how they're going to just create mismatch nightmares with 5 shooters on the floor. And then they can also change it up, and they always have a big dude who might not be able to shoot, but he can take you into the paint and get buckets on you that way. So I like the versatility. With Muss, I know Connor hit on it with his tournament resume the last 3 years, to where even though he hasn't gotten over the hump yet, I think it shows that he tends to create rosters that are malleable and can adjust in a tournament setting. And I can see where Connor's coming from with saying that it hasn't been quite as intentional, to where it just seems like they reach out to everybody in the portal and just kind of take the influx of guys, to where, this year's team in particular doesn't make the most sense on paper. Yet I still sort of just have this trust out of Musselman to always get the most out of like whatever 6'6", 6'7", 6'8" wing he brings in. So maybe that even counters what I said earlier about, Caleb Battle and not being as high on Arkansas. But you look at like Audigi Tony, who he turned into a really solid contributor on an Elite 8 team. Ricky Council was a little under the radar, who it might be on a 2-way contract now. I'm sure there's other wings I'm forgetting that he sort of just knows what he wants and can get out of them. The Martin twins, obviously those are 2 of the bigger examples, but and then Oates is last, and Oates is still a really good coach. But like, I don't know, man, like the PR nightmare that was Alabama basketball this past year, you got to take a hit to that. And I kind of don't like that he hasn't gotten over the Sweet 16 hump. I know that Muss hasn't gotten to a Final Four, but like he's had some really good rosters.
They were in the Elite 8 a couple years ago, weren't they? They lost to UCLA in the Elite 8. UCLA in the Final Four.
Not with
that Sweet 16.
No,
not with Oates.
They made the Sweet 16, and was it UCLA? Yeah, UCLA, who then lost to who beat Michigan. Yeah, it was the Sweet 16 when they lost to UCLA.
Yep. Okay. My apologies.
But like Oates is also batting 500 on SEC titles, right?
Right. So that I was going to have Oates first, and I'm with you on all of last season was a bleeping off-court disaster, and he and that program deserved to be ripped as much as they were and continue to be. But he has had Alabama basketball at a point where Alabama basketball has never been, and he's only been there. He hasn't been there that long, really. And he's winning SEC. He's doing all this stuff. They just haven't, as you mentioned, gotten past the Sweet 16. If this was ranking just NCAA tournament, period, I would have him last and Musselman first, and Bruce Pearl in there at number 2. just overall, I'm flipping that where I'm going Oates, Pearl, Musselman at 3. Musselman is excellent at having his team playing his best in the NCAA tournament, which is why they're so good in the NCAA tournament. We've talked several seasons in a row now of his team's looking shaky in November, particularly December, and then getting stronger and then being like a real force in the SEC when you get to the end of February and March. But that's not the whole season, right? Alabama and is consistently under Nate Oates been, I think, playing at or near its full potential for a majority of the season. So I'm going to go Oates there. I love what Bruce Pearl has done at Auburn and really what he's done everywhere he's been. But I give Oates a slight edge. I wouldn't knock you if you picked Pearl over him. Speaking of Eric Musselman, we're going to end with a question from Greg Waddell, Sleepers Media and Field of 68. Shout out Sleepers. Shout out Field of 68. Make sure you check out Sleepers if you have not. Him and Carter Elliott do fantastic work. Connor, I'm going to start with you. Who would win in a fight? 10 Eric Musselman-sized Zach Eady's or 1 Zach Eady-sized Eric Musselman?
Here's the thing, Brian, is I would take 1 Eric Musselman-sized Eric Musselman over 10 Zach Eady-sized Zach Eady's. So give me the 1 Zach Eady-sized Eric Musselman any day of the week.
The intensity and the craziness that giant would have. You have to go with him.
I think y'all are wrong, man. I think y'all are off on here, dude. I think Muss, as good of a coach as he is, like he does that stuff for the memes, for the viral clip. You know, I think
he's
like
ripped.
whereas Zach, he is, but like Zach Eady has tree trunks for legs, man. Like Zach Eady is strong and he's like he's literally taking a.
So now you put Musselman in that tree trunk body.
Zach Eady strikes me as a giant teddy bear whose biggest asset in a fight is the fact that when he turns with his elbows out, he hits heads. You put him in an Eric Musselman-sized body. I mean, I guess it's a low blow at that point, but like it's not the same. It doesn't have the same oomph to it. Eric Musselman, I don't know.
I would fully
like
expect a 7'4" Eric Musselman to pick up a 5'9" or whatever it is Zach Eady and just swing him and hit all the other 5'9" Zach Eady's down.
That's a compelling argument for sure. But I just think you're sleeping on Zach Eady's toughness. And don't get me wrong, I've loved making fun of Purdue for losing to a 16 seed this offseason, and I feel like people don't talk about it enough since Virginia was the first to mess that up.
That's it too. He just lost to a team full of Eric Musselman sized guys.
Okay, that's pretty compelling now that you mentioned it.
There you go. We'll end the show with that.
Like,
that's the perfect way to end it. What were you saying, Connor?
No, I was just gonna say I feel like everyone else on Purdue other than Zach Eady was playing the way we're talking about Zach Eady right now. So
that's fair. Yeah. Again, not a knock on Zach Eady. We're just talking up Eric Musselman. That's all we're doing. Well, appreciate your guys' questions.
One of 3 coaches that scares me. That would scare me.
Who are the other 2? This is a question from me. Who are the other 2?
Boyle. I feel like Tad Boyle would scare me if he was mad at me.
Tell him to kick rocks.
I don't know. Maybe it's just Musselman.
Musselman would scare me. I think Bruce Pearl would scare me too with his spittle. Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough question.
I think honestly, who wouldn't scare you? Like a coach
Hubert.
that if they challenged you to a fight, you what?
Hubert. He's just too nice of a guy.
Hubert. I'm gonna say Woodson. I feel like, first of all, I don't think he has the emotional range to get to a point where he'd scare me.
Does he still have the mobility?
Who knows?
I don't even know if he's coaching anymore, but Danny Manning is that same type of just like had the energy of a corpse on the sidelines. Hopefully I never have to interview Danny Manning. I know he's huge, but like...
Oh, you know who would scare me? A third one? Mick Cronin would scare me. I feel like Mick Cronin is just a poor man's Eric Musselman.
The Hurley
Like
brothers,
similar
would
size, maybe a little taller.
the Hurley brothers
doesn't have
would
hair.
terrify me. Pick one.
Danny seems insane. Yeah,
Danny or
I wouldn't
Bobby
want to fight Danny.
would scare me. Yeah.
All right. That's a
final
good
answer.
place to end.
That's a good place to end. Final answer. Zach Edey size, Danny Hurley swinging things around. I don't want to deal with that. Thank you all for your questions and getting us through the dog days of July in college basketball. We really, really appreciate it. Hope you all enjoyed it. My co-host Connor Hope and Riley Davis. I'm Brian Ralph. Thank you guys for listening or watching. We'll talk to you again next time.
Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Come on. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh. Basketball, basketball, college. Whoa, basketball, college.